I think you've given a great example of what it's like to be a person who's been living with the disease for a very long time. 26 years into my own disease without treatment, when I asked my doctor whether I should start treatment, she sought advice from 10 experts around the country and got 10 opinions. So panel seems to mirror that a little bit. My question is, if I understood the science correctly, as a long-term whatever I am, inflammation has continued to happen. I'm wondering about some of the other things we hear about in HIV, and if they've been studied in elite controllers or long-term non-progressors, such as central nervous system problems, depression, lipid dystrophy, and whatever else might not be on my radar, and whether we're still affected by those, even if our numbers are good.
Those are terrific questions, and one of the problems is that you guys are such a rare group of individuals. It's 0.5% of all people with HIV, and then we're trying to find among a very small group of people reasonably uncommon diseases for your age range. It's going to be very difficult to find, and to study those clinical outcomes. So I'm not aware of any studies that have looked at central nervous system disease. I don't know.
There's our new study.
Could have, what's that? Well, except for but in terms of clinical outcomes, in terms of
I'm not aware of any either.
Neurocognitive function, and and it would be hard to do those studies without a large multi-center network, I think. I mean, it's important questions to think about and think about how we would address it. I think it would have to be through a multi-center network. Some of it, in terms of lipids, we could and should address, in smaller studies. But I'm not sure that a lot of work has been done yet in those areas. It's understudied.
Yeah. There might be data. I mean, this is the utility of the international controllers cohort, for example, is sort of getting centralized information that researchers can then go to an information bank and call up data on whatever clinical profiles of controllers all over the world. I just want to interject one point about this new study that we're starting at UCSF, which will be in collaboration with Dick Price and Serena Spudic at SFGH Neurology. And the idea there is to look prospectively. Unfortunately, it's only a 2-year study. It's one of these NIH pilot sort of grants, but there was a lot of interest at NIH for funding this study because precisely this question hasn't been addressed. And so we're going to be using non-invasive MRI scanning up at the VA Medical Center in San Francisco, as well as lumbar punctures to look for, so I think that we may end up doing it in such a way that people can do either or, rather than necessarily having everyone do both, because we realize it's a little bit scary for people. But this is a very important question. There was one paper published by the group at Vanderbilt just last year in the Journal of Virology showing that, and they didn't. If you do a PubMed search and look for controllers and CNS, you won't find this paper because it was not billed as a controller study. It was just a study of CD8 T-cell responses, looking at lumbar punctures, looking at the CD8 T-cells that traffic to cerebrospinal fluid. And what they found was that in people with very, very low viral loads, who technically would be defined as controllers, even though they weren't called that in that study, those people tended to have surprisingly high numbers of HIV-specific CD8s in their CSF, which suggests that those CD8s may be playing a beneficial role. But again, these are cross-sectional studies. It's hard to prove anything. You can just show that you have the cells there. You assume that they're doing something good rather than something bad. They may also be promoting inflammation. We don't really know the answer to that, and that's one reason that we're interested in doing this study, to try and get a little bit more data and also get some imaging data. We're also going to be doing, we're partnering with Kevin Robertson from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who's really expert at doing psychomotor testing and and behavioral testing and so forth. So he has a battery of tests that he uses to score people in terms of neurological function. And, we anticipate that our controllers are all going to be scoring very high on those, very well on those tests. But it's still very important to gather that data and really systematically study it, I think.
I'll just add that I think, like Peter said, one of the difficulties has been that until recently, there haven't been a critical mass of HIV controllers that have been identified, and only now do we have large enough numbers where we can start to study all these various aspects of HIV control that aren't necessarily directly related to the immune response or immunity. So one of the things that Bruce Walker, who's the director of the Reagan Institute, has started is these series of pilot grants, which are being given specifically to people not in the HIV field. And the idea is to hook up people not in HIV with people who are working in the field to try to answer some of these questions. So Stephen Grinspoon, who's an endocrinologist, MJH, there's some discussions with him about studying these things with lipids or metabolic effects of HIV in controllers specifically, and also other groups. So I think that right now we're starting to really recognize that, and there have been now enough people identified where we can look at all these other additional aspects with people not traditionally in the field. And I think that's also part of the idea of that is also because we've studied HIV and HIV immune responses for so long, and I think that we're all waiting for really big new ideas, and that may come from not within the group of people who do HIV research, but maybe from people within other fields, and the recognition that there hasn't been enough sort of crosstalk between people studying things that may seem totally disparate, but in fact may be much more related than we realize.
My question is related more to the genetics of the focus and myself being not registered controller. I found out that my mother, when she was 5 years old, contracted polio. But me, after when she was paralyzed for a week or two, and then the body managed to fight it off. And I was, of course, naturally right away thought, I wonder if there's only being able to fight polio and being able to fight HIV, as well as there a way to check family history, family blood work that's alive, that you actually look at and see is there any correlation of that data?
It's interesting. It's very interesting.
We've been thinking about these ideas and have essentially zero data to back it up. So, but what we have at least anecdotally seen is among people HIV controllers with hepatitis C in our cohort. A disproportionately high number of them seem to have cleared hepatitis C on their own, we haven't studied enough people to see if that's a real finding or a spurious association just because we've studied too few people, and we're trying to collect more and more data on that. We have seen that we have measured CMV, specific immune responses in our cohort of controllers, and we see higher CMV-specific CD4 responses in our HIV controllers than any other HIV-infected group, untreated HIV-infected group that we've studied, and also much higher than HIV-uninfected individuals who are CMV seropositive. And we've wondered whether there may be some host mechanisms yet to be defined that might help HIV controllers fight more than one virus. But we don't have a mechanism, and the data are still very preliminary. But we're thinking about these types of issues, but we can't give you any confirmatory.
I think it's very important to look back at other infectious diseases, and there is no evidence that if you're protected from polio, that you won't get some other infectious disease. There can be a specific inherited response. The same thing for Epstein-Barr virus. I always liked when subjects ask me that question, will I have less colds? Will I have less chance of getting the flu? No evidence. You'll be like everybody else. You just happen to have a good response to HIV. And I always give the example of the chimpanzee. A chimpanzee can be infected with hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HIV, doesn't show any really pathologic events that occur as a result of that, but dies from the common cold.
Just one also, taking it out of the realm of infectious disease, one thing that I think everyone is aware of as well is that a lot of these HLAs that are associated with control are also associated with some types of autoimmune disease. So there is some connection there, but what that is, no one really is sure. But I think everyone realizes that and has that in the back of their head. There's something there, that these controllers have these HLAs, which are also coming up in the rheumatological fields as associated with things like ankylosing spondylitis or some types of arthritis.
But that is often a question. What is the relationship to lupus, HIV infection, scleroderma, or these others? Frankly, there's very, very little data. And unfortunately, and I just said this at a recent convention, very little work's done on autoimmunity. So some of the stuff you're finding should be a little more emphasized because there are very few people looking at the association.
Well, more outreach to people outside the field, to rheumatologists, to sort of.
Even HLA-B57, which we check clinically now for back-of-ear hypersensitivity. So people who are on therapy may have had HLA-B57 checked because if you have that, then you are much, much more likely to have an adverse reaction to getting a back-of-ear, right? So there again, it's, that's an HLA. Is it coincidence? Is there some mechanistic reason why that's also one of the HLAs we see?
And I am absolutely sure that thanks to all of you that you're going to break the code. I do.